good afternoon or good day. I'm Velani Mboweni, co-founder and CEO of Lula in Cape Town, South Africa. Lula is an app that's connecting corporate commuters to private shuttles on their way to work to save you money and free up time.
Oh my goodness. This is gonna be a very great conversation. I don't one of the questions I was gonna ask you is why you got into the rideshare industry in the first place, right? Like what was the inspiration? And I'm just curious if you thought about this at all. So like in terms of being here since I've been in Nairobi since November, like there's been a ridiculous amount of crazy scenarios that I found myself in. So like number one, sometimes people just cancel like on me like out of nowhere, which is like that sometimes happens in New York, but it was like happening at a way more frequent rate here. And I think it has to do with the second thing that I'm gonna say, which is like every time I would call a ride, they would call me and ask me where am I, like where am I, and I'm like, and I'm like, I thought that the technology is supposed to tell you that. Like I'm confused. So yeah, so they would call me and they would say, where are you right now? I don't know where you are. So then I'll just tell them after a while because I'll just get frustrated. And then I'll see sometimes that they're just staying in one spot, and then all of a sudden like they are just appearing all of a sudden in a new spot. So like the technology or the GPS is not keeping up. And then when I get in the ride, I have to navigate them to where we're going. So it's like I basically am the actual driver. Like I should just invest in the car at this point. That was my experience thus far in Africa dealing with rideshare. So I don't know if that has anything to do with why you started this in South Africa, but tell me about it.
So, I mean, there's a myriad of things you mentioned around the industry, the technology, the operations, the product, and just the general market. So, I think to answer the first one about why I got in,
Mm-hmm.
I never officially started Lula to be a ride sharing business.
Right.
So it was originally started to be a platform to give people access to different modes of transport, which is based on the premise that without access to transport, you can't access opportunity, and if you
Mm-hmm.
can't access opportunity, you can't solve, the economic challenges that we have. And so that was really the original premise, and it remains a premise, but the way in which we sought to go achieving that goal has differed significantly. And I think about mid 2018 is when we officially like changed things in our business to focus on the actual transportation of people,
Yep.
as opposed to just providing the options. And so at that time, Uber had already been in South Africa for about 5 years. Um, Taxify or Bolt had been in for maybe 2 years. And what I noticed is that most people just try to copy the winner or copy the leader in the industry. And that is a mistake that I think most unseasoned entrepreneurs would make, because they like to say imitation is the best form of flattery. But the more you get into the details of it, you realize that there are serious complexities that you don't appreciate standing from the outside. Really, why I got into this place is that I really wanted to create a niche. I wanted to focus on guaranteed rides, or like the rides that I could at least bank on, which is commuting. So people come into work and back, and really wanted to make sure that we could be sustainable. So it wasn't a case about how can I make a quick buck, how can I just get vehicles. It was about how can you create a philosophy that can scale, and a philosophy that is inherently better than the rest of us. I come from an economics and philosophy background, and one of the famous sayings in Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations is that it is not for the regard of, it is not about the benevolence of the baker that we should expect our bread, but rather for his regard for his own self-interest. And that literally means that a baker is not providing goods because he's altruistic, but because he cares about his own self. And I think that philosophy can kind of plug into sustainability, right? Most people think, oh, reduce your carbon footprint, don't use plastic, all these kind of things, and we think it's an altruistic thing. But the moment you make it a self-interested thing to say, hey guys, free up your time that you spend driving, sitting in traffic, save a lot of the money that you're counting by using a more affordable option, and just ride with people that you can reasonably trust. That is enough a value proposition to make the self-interest become the altruistic interest. So I guess that is primarily the core in which we got into the market, and really try to underline that the driver ecosystem is also very important. So we were very, dare I say, successful in curating the types of drivers we would have. And we're not in a business where we want to scale as fast as we can and flood the market with drivers who are not getting enough trips, but really taking things in a step-by-step process, similar to Toyota's principles of Kaizen. So we really apply Kaizen in what we do, because in the words of Drake, it's not about who did it first, it's about who did it right. So yeah.
You just quoted a plethora of philosophers from my most recent Canadian export to Adam Smith. And you said a lot there too. So I'm trying to remember all the different things. So on the one hand, I think I want to go back to when you said that you weren't entering into this to be in the rideshare industry, because I think that was an interesting point in terms of like what do you think people define rideshare industry as, number one, and then number two. Well, actually, let's just stop there for a second because we want to break it down. So, like, I'm just trying not to forget my questions. But how do you define rideshare industry?
So, I mean, typically the rideshare industry, or what they would also call as the e-hailing industry, is when someone can book a ride on demand with an owner or someone who operates a vehicle in a non-traditional sense. So your day job is not a taxi service. It just happens that you have a vehicle that you can share with someone else. That is the core underlying premise of ride sharing,
Right.
Which is very different to like ride hailing or carpooling or
Right.
the other jargon that you have. So that's how you
That's
define
perfect.
ride sharing.
That's perfect. So then that
segues great into my next question, which is, outside of like the fact that Uber is a major player and because of the success that happened with it, you didn't want to just copy it. What is the other reason for like designing your platform in this way? Like, are there specific idiosyncrasies with the African market that makes Uber, in your opinion, because I have opinions about this, but in your opinion, do you feel like your model is more idiosyncratic and better for the African market versus something like an Uber?
So, again, I think it just boils down to the philosophies of why you start a business. I think Uber has a global approach. They're really focusing on winner takes all. I think the environment in which we came about was already focusing on emerging markets and African markets and South Africa as the basis of which the innovation came out of. So I think that we again, like, it's the localization aspect and where we come from is probably a strength that we have. But that does not eliminate us from applying the solution in different environments. What I have understood over time is that Lula in South Africa will probably differ to Lula in Kenya, or Lula in Ivory Coast, or even Lula in Texas, or Lula in Boston. The principles remain the same, but the environments will change differently. What you'll see is that maybe in more developed markets, you'll see people on Lula being driver owners who do this as a side hustle, whereas in Africa and emerging markets, it's literally their full-time job. So you'll see these changes taking place. And of course, having the right people who understand those circumstances can inform your policies and inform how you implement that operationally. I think those are the core differences.
That's interesting. Because, okay, so just some background for people who might not know, like, Uber is capitalizing on the gig economy, right? So, like, in America, there's this philosophy, or there's this trend towards being your own employee or your own employer, like being, your own self-driven business, right? So it doesn't even matter if it's rideshare, it's like any industry, right? It's like, I'm doing this, like, as a side hustle in addition to my other job, like you said. Whereas, again, people didn't think that people would be doing this as a full-time job in other markets, especially the emerging markets, right? I think the reason why Uber, I don't want should I say successful, I guess, like has been successful in being able to enter markets so quickly is because like it's a cookie cutter model, right? Not that it's a right cookie cutter model, but it's just like all I have to do is take this and paste it over there and keep doing it fast. So that's where the global mindset comes from. Not necessarily that they're successful. And you can tell like I'm hating on Uber a lot right now, but it's like it's not that it's successful. It's just like the reason why they're able to plop in so quickly as opposed to something like you is because there's less intricacies in terms of their models. Like, oh, if you have a phone and you have a car, just join Uber, and like that's how it replicates so fast. So it's almost like a virus then in that case too. In that like, and I'm maybe I'm venting, but there's a question in there somewhere, and that like I don't appreciate the fact that, and this is why I wanted to interview you. I don't appreciate the fact that because it's so like quote unquote lean in terms of like the pieces of the puzzle that need to come together to plant yourself somewhere, because it's lean in that regard, investors seem to like flood towards them. I mean, there could be other situations, other variables in place in that it started in Silicon Valley or started in a Western context. And so for whatever reason, that means that it's much more like tried and trusted and true. Or it could be because of who the founders are, like their background specifically, that's why more investors are attracted to them. But I do think it's mainly also because of like, we just want to be able to say, can we just duplicate this everywhere? And that's what's been so frustrating with me, because I know that there's people on the ground in Africa that have already had the foresight to see like this cannot work for several reasons. The quality control. Uber doesn't seem to care about that in terms of like, they built a brand that's so big at this point that even if they have so many complaints about sexual harassment, so many complaints about careless drivers, like being dangerous on the roads, especially in places where people are not really held accountable by law. You know, in the US, you can maybe get stopped by a cop. You know that there's a system in place that outside of the complaint on the app to get your like retribution, right? But in places like emerging markets, like there's no real accountability. So you just see very big variations, and a lot of times on the scale of like it's very bad in terms of quality control. So I'm just like so frustrated that so many investors go to those models just because they can move in quickly versus thinking about this actually makes sense for the market that we're going into. Because even if you go there and you're able to get, I don't think Uber is profitable at this point right now, but even if you're able to go there and recoup some kind of like profit that you deem worthwhile, it's not going to be to the scale that it should be because, again, of all of these like other concerns that people have. Does that resonate with you at all? And I wonder, like, how does that like play into your struggle, either your wins and your struggles with fundraising as an African-based company?
Wow, there's a lot that you've said.
Yeah.
A lot that you've said. I'll just pick out everything as you've come to. So I think, yes, the cookie cutter model, you know, it works in terms of the first principles, right? So phone, car, online, willing to accept rides, sure, that has worked in its initial stage. But obviously, once Uber shook up the market, regulators started acting fast, or faster, let's call it that. And they were able to kind of cap Uber's growth to a certain extent. So for example, here in South Africa, the city of Cape Town has issued about 2,000 permits available for Uber, but there's about 18,000 cars. So 1 in 9 cars has a permit. So that effectively means that for any of the 8 cars, you are effectively a risk. So if the cops stop you and they see you don't have a permit, they impound your car. Passengers to get out and make their own plan. So there's that aspect. The second aspect is that, again, from the philosophy and the beliefs, it's one thing if you're building a business to just grow and not be profitable and eventually try to sell it to something. That's great. But if you are a conscious entrepreneur or someone who's building something for a long-term business, you want to work out that pathway to profitability. I think we've got that done pretty well. To have a clear path to profitability, which investors can see that, hey, if you're doing X amount of rides every day with this many companies, you're a profitable business. Copy and paste that in another market, and we can, replicate that. There is the aspect of you mentioned issues about regulation and the laws. Yeah, I think no one was really prepared for what Uber could actually do, because they had lots of capital, clearly focusing about growth instead of profitability, and they could scale fast. But as you saw, the localization aspect has had them exit a lot of markets. So they exited China. They've lost out in a lot of developing markets. Um, yeah, just because what you're seeing is that it's not really working. And of course, because they're now under pressure for profit, they are, you know, really paying bad wages to
Right.
drivers, and
Right.
it's causing churn and it's causing bad service. It's causing a lot of issues. From the Lula side, I think again our philosophy is long term. Our philosophy is about sustainability, and our philosophy is really about unlocking opportunity for emerging markets, right? Which eventually will probably spill over to the rest of the world. And I think we're happy to take things slower than Uber. I mean, of course, we don't have as much capital, but I think again, it's about getting it right in the long term as opposed to just a short victory. From an investor side, I think what we've had to do is really, really spell out the business opportunity as well as how we differ from all these conventional ride-hailing services. And that has made us, at least, dare I say, have more conversations with the investors to carry on. Because the unfortunate reality is that in Africa, there's capital scarcity, right? Whereas in the US, there's surplus capital. Every guy who like pops out of Stanford is getting a check, whether the idea is valid or not. And there are those dynamics. And of course, Africa's big other issue is infrastructure. So whilst you may think that, okay, let's just do an Uber for Africa, you don't have the same connectivity infrastructure available.
I also realized that because that's another thing I was going to bring up. I didn't want to like interrupt your train of thought, but it's like, again, with the navigation thing, it takes for granted that model that just because everybody has access to a smartphone, that everyone has access to a strong network and also a data plan. Because I think a lot of the reasons why they're calling is because they don't want to have to plug in, your navigation, or a lot of times when they're asking you where you're going, then they're like trying to think in their mind, have I been through that route before? It's like clearly they can't rely on the same tools that is so ubiquitous in a different market, like let's say New York City.
And of course, let's be honest with ourselves. The developing world is a lot more dangerous than the developed world, right? So we have a situation where gangs and mafia members have been very clear that if you're an Uber driver or you're not from the Minibus Taxi Association, we will shoot and kill you if you drive this area. Those are things that are completely absurd in the developed world. But if a developed world company wants to come to developing world and they don't take that seriously, you could see a business die. And that's not a good thing. So very few people have that context because maybe they see, oh, Africa is this frontier market, it's growing, it's not as big as the US, and let's kind of just treat it as another checklist. But the point is that there are lots of on-the-ground complexity that most people don't even understand.
So I guess to like kind of end this on a advice for people who are looking to get into this space, because you see them popping up everywhere, SafeBoda, etc. What do you think is the likelihood of their success in this industry, like more African owned and African led companies in this area, in terms of like sustainability from a revenue standpoint and also from an investor standpoint? What advice do you have about them in terms of like quality control again, like, or I guess maybe what my real question is, if you're trying to do this in the African market and you're trying to be successful on the customer end in terms of like branding, do you feel like there's enough of that mindset or interest in building that kind of like strong customer service branding in Africa? And if not, what can we do to resolve that?
Well, I think the first thing to maybe state is, let's just lay out the land in terms of what the kind of customer journey looks like from a retention and acquisition perspective. In your developed markets, you see that you have higher customer acquisition costs and lower customer lifetime values. Whereas in your developing market, you see the inverse. So what that means is that if your Uber driver in the US, happens to talk to you and share racist views, you delete the Uber app and you never come back. Whereas in Africa, Your Uber driver can be late, can be smelly, can do like the most heinous crime, but you're going to use Uber in the next 20 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Costs are low, but the lifetime value extends. So just understanding that factor means that effectively that the leader can kind of monopolize the market because they have that strength. So there's not a lot of customer switching. It's a
Yeah.
very important thing to understand. So any play about being successful in the emerging market must take a long-term view by definition. Many people, come up with, Uber type apps in South Africa and Kenya and say, oh, we're the South African version of Uber. That's why you should use our service. That does not hold. It may be a signaling mechanism. It may be a signaling thing for the drivers and say, okay, cool, let's work with a local company instead of having the money leave. Yes, that can help, but it's not, sustainable in the long term. So my core advice beyond those two premises is to say, if you can build something that attacks a need that is undeniable, so something that's what we call a bleeding neck problem as opposed to a headache problem. To solve a bleeding neck problem and have the kind of nuances around the quality service, I think you'll get more people joining your service, but also building a sense of community. So how can one user be an ambassador for 2 or 3 more other users to join the platform? That kind of virality or that viral coefficient. It's not easy if you don't have investment because these things cost money. You need to have some kind of marketing budget in place to drive that kind of continuous customer acquisition.
Yeah.
But as long as you can find 100 or 500 users who absolutely love your product, you can use them to kind of drive the acquisition. Because at the end of the day, let's call it what it is. You're providing a transport service. Whether it's a blue app, a black app, a green app, a yellow app, a red app, it doesn't matter. It's a transportation service. And can you just deliver that with quality? And that comes in like how you speak with drivers, how you train drivers, how you incentivize drivers. That can be the difference. Because, it's funny, we were having this conversation with someone last night and we were saying that, I remember the days when I used Uber first time in 2013, that all the cars were like luxury Mercedes Benzes, drivers are well trained. Now I get in one and the drivers are either smoking or playing on their phone whilst they're driving and like not looking, because it's become that kind of industry. It's become just so big. And so to succeed, you just need to listen to what's going on in the market and really, really like bet your horses on the long-term thing. It's like the difference between playing chess and playing checkers, right? Checkers is a one step at a time game. Chess, you got to think 3 steps ahead. So anyone who's in the market just needs to have that chess mentality, but also think about it long term and how you can deliver quality over quantity for a bleeding neck problem.
No, that's it. We literally went through all the questions so fast because I was just so frustrated that I had to get it all off my chest. So thank you.